Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I'm sitting here today with SGA President Morgan Littleford. Morgan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Morgan is enjoying her final term here at Central Penn College, looking forward to grooming our future SGA president during the SGA elections, which coincidentally happen right around the time of the general election. So not only do we want you to go out and vote in the general election, make sure you cast that vote in the SGA election coming up in the beginning of November. Our special guest today is former Deputy Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, John Butchar. Any dedicated podcast listeners know that we have John on each and every election season to talk a little bit more about the races and get you prepared for going out to the polls. So, John, it's such a pleasure to have you back.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
You're very welcome. John, now you've been retired from your post since 2011, but one thing that you've always done is maintained a high interest in politics. So just flashing back to what you did back when you were the Deputy Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, can you just refresh our listeners' memories on what that job entailed and what were some of your duties over your time there?
Well, being a Deputy Attorney General just means I was one of the attorneys hired by the Attorney General's office. I was there for many years, up close to 30 years, and became a Senior Deputy Attorney General. In the Attorney General's office, everybody works in a certain area of expertise. Mine was state tax litigation, so that would be incredibly boring to a lot of your listeners. But what I did was a lot of the banking and insurance and corporate tax litigation for the state of Pennsylvania against the large corporations. So an opponent would be Texaco or Colgate, Palmolive or Walmart or all the car companies. And basically what I do is try to preserve the Commonwealth's fisc and the money we had against those who felt we were overtaxing a given area.
But one thing, and you're always very modest about what you did, but you've come into my class several times, and you spent, would you say, a large chunk, I don't want to necessarily say a majority, but you spent a lot of your time in arguing in front of the state Supreme Court. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Commonwealth Court and the Supreme Court.
That's, to me, that's amazing. I guess I'm just fascinated by those things, and to know that, for you, that was just another day at the office, man. It's awesome to have you, and we really appreciate having you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you. That was the fun part, actually. The actual litigation was the fun part. The day-to-day grinding through the hundreds of cases we all handled, that was the times hard part, but the litigation part was the fun part.
Are you saying you were undermanned?
Very much so.
Yeah. Well, today what we're going to talk about is some very important things coming up for our general election. The general election will occur on Tuesday, November 6th, so please make sure that you're budgeting time in your day to go vote. But Morgan, we're here to talk to you also about what your thoughts are about the voting process. I mean, you are 21?
Yes.
So you're 21 and you're about ready to graduate, but you've, been surrounded by people your age. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about college students and voting and what their thoughts are. We are going to talk about the three races that really would apply to everybody in the state of Pennsylvania, from our U.S. Senate, our governor, and our lieutenant governor positions. We'll talk about some of those. And then we'll end the show talking about the ramifications of some changes, the potential changes, let's say, in the U.S. Senate and House, and the impact that will have on the next 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency. So I want to start off with you, Morgan. There's some stats that I wanted to talk about just quickly and just to open up this conversation. I will say that turnout in the 2016 election, in the last presidential election, actually went up over 3%, from 45.1% to 48%. And among those that are registered voters, it went up over 3% again, from 68.5% of registered voters to from 65.3%. Unfortunately, voter registration did not really considerably increase in time between 2012 and 2016. And we also always see a major drop between the midterms and the presidential elections. What do you think, as a college student, what are some things that we might be able to do as a society to try to get more people to vote when not even half of the people in our country are voting at this point. Even in a major election like Hillary and Trump, only 48.3% of people even voted. What are your opinions? What are some ideas you might have of ways to get more young people involved in the voting process?
Well, I think the main thing is to just teach young people that your voice and your vote do matter. No matter what, you might not like everything that a candidate says, but you still need to go out and vote, because it's very important to have someone in the office that at least represents something that you represent. That way we can live the way we would like to live, and we can have rules and regulations in place that help people live comfortably in America. And then another thing I think for midterm elections is we need to publicize it like the general elections, because not a lot of people know about the midterms or what they mean or what ramifications they have. And I think if we start to publicize it more people will start coming out and realizing it's just as important as the presidential elections.
Well, and you have an interesting scenario here as well, because you are from Maryland. Yes. So it's you've really probably never been able to vote in your home state because of being at Central Penn College. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the complaints, I suppose, from a lot of college students that are out of state from their home state, or they're not even able to vote in their local municipalities. Do you think there should be more education on maybe a college campus about absentee ballots or how to vote in your current? And I know we do that here, but I wish that maybe there was a little bit more push to get students to understand the importance of voting. What are your opinions on that? Because you do go to school out of state.
Yes. So for me, I did the absentee ballot. I think that needs to be publicized more, because a lot of people don't know that that's something you can do. And as a college student, since you're not home to actually vote, that kind of gives them the excuse of, oh, I'm not there, so I can't vote, when you have other resources you could use to vote, and you need to learn about those resources so you could use them. And then I think there should be a way that college students could vote in different places so their voice and their vote is still heard.
I think that logistically that would probably be difficult, but I don't disagree with you at all. Mm-hmm. John, just when talking about the turnout, the voter turnout, even in 2016, only at 48.3%, what do you think about how we go about the voting process in this country, and maybe what are some things that might be able to be done about it?
Well, the turnout is always disappointing, and the turnout in midterm elections is always more disappointing. One of the things that I think in those areas where you have pretty much locked in parties for a given district, people feel that it's, why should I bother to vote? Mm-hmm. I mean, where I live, at times there's no Democratic challenger, or a Democratic challenger, almost a token name put on the ballot. So why should I vote in those particular local elections? For me, it's to just express my, one, displeasure with the fact that there's only one person on the ballot, and two, to have my voice heard, as insignificant in some elections that may turn out to be from a numbers standpoint. Now, typically during the midterms, the Republicans are better getting out the midterm vote. We'll see how that works this time. All reports are that registration in the state and registration nationally is up among millennials and Democrats, and not up so much on the Republican side. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, if the turnout is higher on the Democratic side, and what that does to the election cycle.
Do you suppose that all the political turmoil, for lack of a better word, of the last 2 years, do you think that might impact us some higher voter turnout in this particular midterm election?
Well, it might. It might energize the bases, and it might turn off the bases. It's hard to really say. I don't have a crystal ball there. One of the things you mentioned about how to increase turnout, how do we encourage people, how do we get them to know who's on the ballot? You mentioned maybe we should do a better job at the college level. I think we should do a better job from the elementary level on, establishing to kids growing up that voting is important. that it's a part of the natural process of growing up and becoming an adult and becoming involved, knowing the issues, and not just blankly following either your parents or other influences, but making some decisions on your own and actually deciding who do I want to be as a person. As you're growing up and deciding that, and that's a good time to also decide what causes do I support, what do I stand for, and what candidates best match, what party best matches. It's very interesting that very often when you take a group of people and ask them about how they feel about certain issues, and they respond, and then you say, well, guess what? You're a strong Democrat. And they say, no, I'm a Republican. I always vote Republican. I said, well, maybe you should review what you believe and who is running, who believes what you do.
One thing I had this very interesting conversation. We were going somewhere last night with the kids, and I have a 16-year-old daughter. And, we were talking about some of the issues, and she was trying to figure out, if she was a Democrat or a Republican. So I ran down a list of, the top kind of ways to discern which way you might lean. And she was kind of surprised by some of them. And I do think that she understands the importance, and I really hope that we as a family have instilled in her the right to vote. And I even said to her last night, I don't care how you vote. And I say this in class too, I don't care how you vote. I just want you to vote, because so many people over the years have died and given their lives for the right for individuals to vote all across all over the years, whether it's, different classes, different races, different genders, all of these individuals that have come before us and allowed us this opportunity to vote. I think that's why, to me, it's always struck such a chord and made me vote in every election that I possibly can. Primary, general election every year. I'm voting multiple times a year. But what's interesting is she brought up, well, some people don't want to vote. And I think that the problem is, for me, is apathy. And I think it's only unfortunately getting worse with our current political climate, in that so many people are so turned off by politics, whether it's just because of social media, whether it's because of the way it's covered on our television news, especially your Fox News, your CNN, your MSNBC, and it just constantly just seems like people yelling and screaming at each other. Our nation seems more and more polarized and becomes more and more polarized by the day. I guess I'm just upset that she said that. And that really struck a nerve with me that, well, if people don't want to vote, they shouldn't have to. And I suppose I agree. I mean, it's optional, but at the same time, when you think about it in the larger perspective, the less people that vote, that really can have some profound impacts, especially because the people who aren't voting are often the people who need the most help. Mm-hmm. And it really struck a nerve with me, John, that my daughter said that. And she's, if people don't want to vote, that's up to them. Well, and I think that's part of the problem, is that we're kind of, as a country, we're saying that it's okay if you don't vote, whereas I contend the opposite. I think everyone should vote. I don't want to have to mandate it. I mean, that's ridiculous, but I guess I just think more people should use politics in their own way. If you don't want to watch the TV, if you don't want to read the news, that's fine. But at least take 5 minutes to go and see who's running and pick whoever works best for you, And people who vote straight party line, I think that's just to try to save them time, or because they've always voted this way, but that's not always in your best interest.
Well, it isn't always in your best interest, and very often if you look at the demographics of a given state and who they elect, say, for president, you say, well, the policies of that person are diametrically opposed to actually what's best for the majority of people in this state. But people will just, they hold on to a party, they hold on to maybe one thing that they like about that party, and with blinders on, ignore everything else around them. I will say that one of the things that counters getting out the vote is there is a fair amount of attempts at voter suppression in this country. Georgia just purged 60,000 people from their voter rolls.
On what grounds? On
the grounds that they didn't vote in the last election.
Since when's that a reason to scrub the ballots?
Well, that's a good question, and that goes to the heart of why people should get involved. Every state sets their own parameters as to who's eligible, how you register, how easy or difficult you make it to register, and how often you must vote or you get purged. In the state of North Dakota, they just purged over 100,000. They're in the process of purging over 100,000 Native Americans. They are basically eliminating sort of another form of genocide. This is just the political genocide following the actual genocide we visited upon Native Americans for so many years. But they have, the election board, controlled by Republicans there, decided that each person must have a listed street address. And the way it works, and I understand in a lot of the reservations, is people all have a post office box. And that's what they go by. And they don't necessarily have streets with street numbers like we have in a lot of our communities. So right now, the Native American community is scrambling to create a system of assigned street names and numbers so they can re-empower and refranchise their parties, their people who have been stripped of even the right to vote.
That is absolutely incredible. Now, on the other side, I did hear in recent weeks that Florida is making some strides to try to allow an additional 1.4 million convicted felons to have the opportunity to vote, which is another disenfranchised population that has been not allowed to vote in elections for a long time. I mean, it's, to me, the suppression of voting goes exactly against everything that our country stands for. And that's what bothers me so much. And again, we're not here today to tell you who to vote for. We're just going to try to talk about some of their qualifications. I just want people to vote and be educated about, even if it's taking 10 minutes and looking. Now, I wouldn't recommend that, but if that's all that you're willing to do, I'd much rather you do that than just go in and vote straight party line. And the suppression of voters, it's something, unfortunately, that is, when you see how many groups have had their voting rights suppressed, and then on the other hand, you hear people say that they don't want to vote because it's a pain, or they aren't interested in politics. It's mind-blowing to me, and it's very saddening to me as well that people in this country don't even have, many disenfranchised groups don't have the right to even vote, and then other groups have the right to vote but then don't exercise it, and it's mind-boggling to me. So
one of the things we just discussed a moment ago was how to get people to vote, and I suggested we should start young, helping them understand the importance of the process and how it actually works. So there's no fear the first time you walk into a voting booth. However, there's voter suppression there too, because those states that have decided to use the classroom to teach kids how to vote, not to indoctrinate them with a certain philosophy, there's been pushback. People saying, no, we can't do that because we fear the teachers will indoctrinate or push or suggest one way or the other to their students. So that has gone pretty much nowhere, and there's a real effort to suppress even the teaching of how to vote in the classrooms.
Well, and there's many states in our union that have voter ID laws, and that is enough to suppress votes, because there are people that may not be able to afford an ID, maybe their ID's expired, they can't get to the DMV. I mean, just voter ID laws inherently are a way to suppress votes as well. And often the people whose votes are suppressed are those in lower class. And often those are the people who need the most change in their government and their government officials. So it really has blown my mind the more research I've done over the maybe past 10 years of my life about how voter suppression exists, and why, Morgan, that I talk constantly about the need to go vote. I don't care who you vote for. Now, we can have a conversation and we can talk politics, around the dinner table or something like that. But I'm never going to get up in front of my class and say, you must vote for this person or you should vote for this person, because I just want people to do their own research. But Morgan, from your perspective, and I know that, I'm asking you to solve the world's problems here. What do you suggest? What could be done, in your opinion, to start increasing the likelihood of millennials voting over the next decade?
Well, I think right now millennials are taking it way more serious than they used to. And I think that stems a lot from having different celebrities come out and say, you need to vote. Yara Shahidi, who's on Blackish and Grownish, she just turned 18 and she's so excited about voting that she created her own platform to get other people who are turning 18 to register to vote. And she has such a big platform that she's been able to get people around the country to actually register. And if we have people like her and other people to just say, listen, no matter how old you are, well, you have to be legal, but you can go out and vote and your voice will have that power. We can continue to make the percentage of people who are registered go higher and higher. That way it feels like everyone has a voice and everyone is being heard during the elections. I also think it is up to parents to teach their kids about voting and who they should vote for, or even just how to look it up for themselves so they can be their own person and figure out what they like and what they want to see in this world. And the same goes with teachers, to teach about different elections and what's happening and just different ways to get your voice heard through voting.
I do want to follow up, and then we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back. Morgan, you mentioned even how to look. Okay, I just want to give everybody three very interesting websites that I have used in my classes and to try to educate students. The number one is, if you are a young voter and aren't really sure what side that you're with, I always, first day of class, media and politics, we went to isidewith.org, and basically what it is it gives you an opportunity to answer some questions about your thoughts about how our government works, and gives you feedback over what side that you would be best aligned with. As far as who's on your ballot this time, we are going to talk about three main ones in Pennsylvania, but you can always go to ballotpedia.org or vote411.org as for ways to get your sample ballots, so you can actually know who exactly is going to be on the ballot when you go in. And the last couple of years, I've just kind of made a cheat sheet, especially last year, where there was, when we had discussions about the state Supreme Court and people, frankly, who I'd never heard of before, I took a little cheat sheet in, made sure I was voting for the right people. So isidewith.org, ballotpedia.org, and vote411.org are excellent resources for our listeners to go out and check and be prepared. All right, we're going to take a really short break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of these Pennsylvania races for U.S. Senate, governor, and lieutenant governor. And then we're going to talk about some possible ramifications of the changes in the U.S. Senate and House for the final 2 years of President Trump's term. All right, we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Steve Hassinger, Career Services Director. Thank you for listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Welcome back to the Nightly News Podcast. We are sitting here with SGA President Morgan Littleford, and we are also sitting with the former Senior Deputy Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, John Butchar. We're talking a lot more about the upcoming general election that will take place on Tuesday, November 6th, all over the U.S. Well, one thing before we get into these races, and we were just kind of talking about this off air, and it kind of sprung something in my mind. We will absolutely mention the third-party candidates, and in this case, Libertarian and Green Party candidates in all three races. But John, you, even as somebody who believes that there should be multiple parties, aren't quite sure and aren't quite sold on the effectiveness of these parties. Can you just elaborate a little bit what you were just talking about?
Well, other than the Republican and Democratic parties, the exposure given to our third, fourth, fifth party candidates is limited. It's hard for them to get their message out. Ideally in a democracy early on, we should have multiple forums and town hall meetings and other stuff where everyone can become known, can get their parties out, their platform out. And I think it's important we have those parties to express their voice and focus on what they think are our biggest issues. However, as I've also mentioned in the past, very often the real effect of the third parties is to affect the vote of either of the two main candidates. We'll call them main candidates because the third parties, it's hard to even consider them one of the main candidates because the way our system works. So I'm kind of torn between a desire to have a lot of parties focused on a few main things each that people can gravitate to and embrace, versus the effect on the election that the third-party candidates have, very often to the detriment of one of the two main parties, and more than the other.
I think that's very interesting, and I've always been an advocate of looking beyond those two main candidates into the third party. But, a lot of people, I believe, and just to your point, don't vote for third parties because they feel that vote might be wasted. And I don't think we ever want to feel that way. Until we get past that point, though, are the third parties ever going to have any relevance?
It remains to be seen.
Right, yeah. I know, I'm asking you the tough questions. All right, we're going to get right into this. And again, what we're trying to do here is just open some dialogue and just try to give some education here to prepare everybody for moving to the polls. And we're going to start with the three big elections in Pennsylvania. And interestingly enough, Morgan, we appreciate you being a part of this, even though you're not going to get to vote on any of these because you're from Maryland.
Yep.
But, you could still chime in with any insight you have, especially if you plan on remaining in this area at any point in your future. We'll start off with the U.S. Senate. This is one of the biggest races and one of the ones that might be one of the closest. We have incumbent Bob Casey Jr., who was Auditor General of Pennsylvania from 1997 to 2005, the Treasurer of Pennsylvania from 2005 to 2007, and the United States Senator from Pennsylvania since 2007. So one of the things, this is based on some of his information that he provided. The top three issues that I am focused on are increasing access to affordable health care, protecting the programs Pennsylvanians depend on, and helping working families get ahead. That means stopping the Trump administration's sabotage of our healthcare system, defeating Republicans' attacks on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and fighting to raise wages, protect the rights of organized labor, and eliminate the obstacles on holding back working families. So that's just sort of an overview of Bob Casey. John, can you talk about what are some of the things that Casey has done while he's been in office that are notable?
Well, one of the things that Lou Barletta's ads, they portray Bob Casey as asleep at the wheel and say he hasn't sponsored or he hasn't written any laws in Pennsylvania. And that may be true because the Republicans have been in charge. That doesn't mean Bob Casey hasn't been working diligently on the issues he believes in, sponsoring, writing, co-sponsoring legislation, but it can't get past the Republican House and Senate. So his job is very much keeping the issues alive, continuing to say no to the changes that the Trump administration has attempted to make to health care and access to health care, et cetera. So it depends on your view. If your only view is did a certain legislator, whether it be a House member or a senator, get their agenda enacted, well, that only works if they're the majority party, because quite frankly, it's hard for the minority party to enact major changes. It's really their job to not obfuscate and stop, but certainly slow down a train they think is going the wrong way. So Bob Casey continues to work for access to health care, protecting the seniors, something that Lou Barletta's votes do not do. And so, that's really his job. On the other side, Lou Barletta is new to the running to the U.S. Senate, but his voice has always been strongest, a Trump voice, anti-immigration. He made his mark as mayor of Hazleton by enacting all these anti-immigrant policies, even though it was beyond the scope of his control.
Now, it says in his bio that he was a member of Congress. Does that mean the state Senate? Well, he was never a member of the U.S. Senate.
No, he was a member of the U.S. House.
U.S. House.
Yeah, he got elected after mayor of Hazleton. He got elected to the U.S. House for what was a very gerrymandered district, and all the districts are still gerrymandered, but I think a little more, a little closer to contiguous.
Well, according to his website, Lou Barletta, his top three priorities are keeping Pennsylvania's families safe, protecting Pennsylvania jobs, and standing up for the men and women who serve our communities. More than anything, people want someone willing to fight for them when no one else will. That's what I have always done, and that's why I'm running for U.S. Senate. Something that's so you do bring, and this is again directly from his website. There should not and cannot be a plan to offer amnesty to millions of illegal aliens present until we secure the borders. As a member of the House Homeland Security Committee, which has broad jurisdiction over border security, protecting the country from terrorist attacks, responding to disasters, and protecting national infrastructure, I will be a loud voice to fix our broken borders and immigration system. So again, now you can just kind of see where some of the different ideologies are here. Barletta also talks a lot about continuing Pennsylvania's energy creation, whether that's from natural gas or nuclear power or coal. Those are also things that he believes that we should still not only continue but advocate for. A lot of people in the media do compare Barletta's platforms to those of Trump. Would you agree with that?
I would. He's certainly a Trump supporter. And when he talks about protecting the security of people, he ties that in with, of course, border security. There is a tendency among some of the more bombastic Republicans, frankly, to equate, sealing the southern border, building the wall, with somehow that improves the security in America. And it really doesn't. I mean, right now there is a caravan of 4,000 displaced, disadvantaged women and children mostly heading to the United States to seek asylum, protection from their gang violence in their country. We do need a comprehensive overhaul of our immigration system. We need to, I think, allocate certain positions, certain number of spaces at least, to those seeking asylum, those who live in fear for their lives in the country that they live in. We also have to recognize that despite the bombastic rhetoric about all these people pouring across the border, illegal immigrants commit crimes at a lower rate than native-born Americans. That's been true for all time. And part of it is they're worried about the man coming to get them, but ICE coming to pick them up and sending them out. So they usually often lay low. They're often very hard workers. They contribute to society. But I do think the Democrats have dropped the ball in border security, in that there has to be a recognition that everybody really wants secure borders. Now, does that mean a 40-foot wall? Not necessarily. But I think everybody has a concern and wants to be safe, from invasions, as they're often portrayed. But you don't have to do that by building a 40-foot wall. The evidence is that you can build a wall all the way from the Pacific Ocean to to Texas, to the border with the Rio Grande, and it's not going to substantially change the number of people seeking their way into the United States. We have we're a nation of immigrants. Mm-hmm. Every one of these congressmen or senators who are railing against immigrants, at some point their family came here. Other than the Native Americans who were trying to disenfranchise from the vote, everyone else came here from the time of the Vikings or Christopher Columbus, and many very much more recently. My family came here basically around 1900 in a great influx during the Industrial Revolution, when much of our population got here, and that's where we all started. We were all immigrants at that point. But I do feel a lot of the DACA crowd, as they're known, a lot of these people have been here 10, 20, or more years. They're integrated in our community. They have jobs. They pay taxes. They're first responders saving lives in storms. They're in our military. To not find a way to allow them to secure citizenship when they've been here all this time contributing, I think is a crime.
Well, we are going to move on. I did just want to make a note that Dale Kearns, libertarian, notes that number one platform that we as a country must address the opioid epidemic and end the war on drugs. He says that he will sponsor legislation, if elected, to fundamentally change how we view drug problems and move our system to one similar to Portugal or Switzerland, where drug addiction is treated as a medical issue. Also wants to talk about education and how there's not enough lack of options for their children. The Green Party is running Neil Gale, and he would like to remove corporate, PAC, and other special interest money from the political process, and among some of the other things, and also talking about reforming their economic model that favors all citizens, not just the top 1%. We are going to move over to governor, in which the two major players here are Democrat and incumbent Tom Wolf and Republican Scott Wagner. Before we start, obviously Tom Wolf has been a very successful business owner and has been governor for a decade. But what's interesting about Scott Wagner is Scott Wagner doesn't have any political background, does he?
Well, he's in the Pennsylvania Senate. He was elected to the PA Senate last cycle, and I don't recall whether he may have just resigned and to run for governor.
I thought that's what, but either way, it's limited.
Well, it is limited, and he came as a business owner, and his focus is on raising taxes, reducing regulation, etc. And that seems to be a overarching main part of the Republican platform. Let's cut taxes. Let's remove impediments. Let's eliminate regulations, cut down on the red tape. Well, people have to realize when someone is running for let's cut taxes, let's curb the regulations, is that most of those regulations are there for your health and safety. I mean, when we remove those or change the things that I think are advances that we've managed to achieve over the last 50 years. If you go back to the 1960s, and I was around, you guys weren't, but you couldn't go to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was a city under a pall of smoke and haze from the steel industry that was dying, but still polluting and killing people. Now you go to Pittsburgh, it's a beautiful city, it's high tech, it's high medical, there's a lot of other things. And Trump gets elected with the part of his platform, let's bring steel back and get those coke ovens fired up and, pollute this western part of the state again. Just by themselves, the administration just rolled back some of the rules from the prior administration on what percentage of ash could go in the air. Their own analysis indicates that it will kill an extra 1,500 Americans a year and will injure mostly with respiratory diseases, but will injure tens of thousands more. So here you have a rollback of regulations or rules, and its main effect is every 2 years it will kill as many Americans as 9/11 did and will injure many more. I don't get it. When the environmental movement took off in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't some wide-eyed, crazy choice. It was a recognition that we have one planet. Now, maybe down the road in future generations, we'll have the ability to colonize other planets. But right now, we have one planet, and we have one planet to protect and save. Environmental conservation used to be a core Republican issue. Go back to 1964, and Barry Goldwater from Arizona ran on protecting the environment, and let's protect the Grand Canyon. And that's part of being a conservative. I always considered myself a conservative, but now how people define conservative is nothing that I recognize from the past.
Well, and Wagner also makes a very particular statement. I will eliminate property taxes as governor. Now, we talked about this on a previous episode and how you had mentioned that there are many in state government that are trying to get away from property taxes, which sounds great. But what's the other side of that? Because if there's no property taxes coming in to fund mainly schools, where's that money coming from?
Well, it has to come from the state, and it has to come from additional sales taxes, maybe a rise in the personal income tax. And one of the things you lose when you lose the property tax is you lose more local control over your schools. If all the money for schools comes through the state coffers and not locally, you'd have less control over how it's doled out, less control over what you're willing to pay as a group. There are a lot of school districts that are, where people are relatively affluent and are willing to pay decent taxes to have good schools. Other places where they're just not able to do that. Do they need state subsidies? Absolutely. If you change everything to a state-based allocation, might that help some schools more? It might. Might it also hurt other school districts that have chosen to try to be elite and funded it to that extent? So it's a real balance. I mean, the goal should be to have, I think, at least 50% of your school funding come from state sources. And it used to be that at one time. Now I think in Pennsylvania it's about 38%. So the 62% of the funding is through your local property tax.
Looking at Tom Wolf, his 3 top platforms are investing in our kids and schools. I have made my clear commitment to education in Pennsylvania by fully restoring education funding cuts made in the previous administration. Also growing jobs and supporting workers and protecting seniors and their access to health care. Wolf also supports voter modernization in Pennsylvania, saying, I have long advocated for voter modernization. Coming into office, I launched an online voter registration, and now more than 1 million Pennsylvanians have used it. I also launched a voter information texting initiative and a program to get high school seniors to register to vote as well. So if that idea of the voter suppression is something that speaks to you, Tom Wolf is somebody who regulates that. But again, Wagner, it almost seems like a lot of Republicans this year are kind of just aligning themselves with Trump's platforms in a way. Because Trump's, a lot of the things that he's saying, a lot of the things that Wagner says here are also some of Trump's very familiar platform pieces. Is this just something that's because Trump is the president that a lot of the people who are running as Republicans feel the need that they have to align themselves with the current president?
Well, quite frankly, if you're in the party and you don't, the ramifications of going against Trump within your own party are just as difficult and as being in the other party and not fully buying into his agenda. So I think it's kind of a natural thing that those people who are running in advance of running say, yeah, I can align with that, and he's bombastic enough for me, and I'm angry at everything that's happening, so I'll go that route too. And one thing I can say about Tom Wolf, he's also been for a Democrat quite pro-business. One of his major accomplishments was actually eliminating the capital stock franchise tax, and you've seen some ads perhaps with that. But that was a very big tax in Pennsylvania. It brought in $1 billion a year. A lot of my litigation back in tax litigation involved the franchise tax, preserving it, and he was able to phase it out. And what that affects is a lot of small businesses, because the franchise tax is a value tax, complicated formula I won't go into here, but it's a value tax on all businesses that is irrespective of whether you make money or not. So even in a losing year, you still owe franchise tax, and he's eliminated that. So I wouldn't say Wolf is also a businessman. So while he's sort of a traditional Democrat in that he's focused on people and healthcare and stuff for, being inclusive, he's certainly not left the business community behind.
On to the final one position that we're going to cover, moving to lieutenant governor. Something very interesting, 2 things before we get into the specific details. This was a historic election for John Fetterman, simply because he, for one of the first times ever, had and won over the incumbent Mike Stack. So the incumbent is no longer in the picture once this election takes place. Mike Stack will be and has lost in the Democratic primary to John Fetterman, which was historic in nature. Now, before in our pre-show meeting, John, you had mentioned that the lieutenant governor position may be eliminated and that there's really very little that the lieutenant governor position even does. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, there's actually a movement afoot, and there have been proposals over the last few years to eliminate the position. The lieutenant governor is not, under our Constitution, charged with a lot of specific duties. It says, obviously, the backup to the governor should something happen, if he has to step in or take over if the governor were to die. Other than that, the lieutenant governor is, one of his duties, I believe, sits on the parole board to help make decisions on paroling ex-prison inmates. But outside of that, and I don't recall, and I did not check on that, I do not recall if the lieutenant governor also sits as a tiebreaker in the Senate like the vice president does in our U.S. Senate. But there has been a lot of, I do know with regard to him running again for re-election, there were some issues with him that I don't recall the exact nature of, and he and Wolf have never been particularly on the same page. So, and of course, in Pennsylvania, you don't run as a team. You don't run as a president, vice president kind of team. So you're not picked by, the president, in this case, the governor. So the question is, you may end up being elected from the same party and have very little in common, or very little interests in common with the governor.
Well, one thing Fetterman and Wolf would have in common is Fetterman says, I support any reform that gets more people to turn out and vote and makes voting easier. In addition to the above measures, I think we should make Election Day a holiday and get more working people to the polls, which I think, so at least as far as that goes, he would. Now, Fetterman was the mayor of Braddock, which is a notorious steel town just outside of Pittsburgh, and he's had dramatic impacts on how that town has basically been resurrected from the dead. He has worked with food and clothing insecurity and eliminated heat insecurity in the town this year. So he also talks about the opioid crisis as well as being a major issue. Jeff Bartos, on the other hand, is a little bit tougher to get because does not have much information about him. And in fact, most information you find about Bartos is in some of the platforms related to Scott Wagner, who is running for governor. But Bartos didn't mention this. A Wagner-Bartos administration will lower taxes, create more job opportunities, and invest more money in our classrooms. Policies that will make it easier to work, raise a family, and provide a better life for our children and grandchildren here in Pennsylvania. Boilerplate stuff, but if you look at what Bartos stands for, it's basically a Wagner-Bartos, they're solid on this one. So maybe that's the difference here. Wolf Fetterman maybe a little bit more individual, maybe may not have the best working relationship, whereas it seems Bartos, Wagner probably are a little bit more attached at the hip, if you will.
Well, I think Bartos is attached to Wagner's hip, and I think Fetterman will be his own man. But I also think that Fetterman is probably much more closely aligned with Wolf than perhaps Stack was. And I do not recall Wolf really working for Stack, and he stayed out of that in the lieutenant governor's race at the primary level. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I can say that the recent polls have Wolf up about 15%. So the expectation is, absent something unusual happening at the polls or a crazy revelation in the meantime, that Tom Wolf is likely to be reelected governor of Pennsylvania, and I think he's been a reasonably even-handed. I'd actually like him to be much more pro-environment than he is. Certainly, we can spend a whole podcast on the shale extraction, the gas extraction, and its effects. But I think Tom Wolf has walked the line successfully, and he's navigated a Republican House and Senate and been reasonably successful in getting some stuff through.
Well, we just have about a minute left on the podcast here, John. I want to talk about some potential changes and for the nation. So we're going to step outside of Pennsylvania now. What could potential changes in this election, what impacts could they have on our country going forward?
Well, I think for anyone hoping that this midterm somehow reduces the divisiveness and the divisive rhetoric in this country, I think you're going to be very disappointed, because I expect that to get much worse over the next 2 years. I see the fabric of the United States being tested over the next couple of years. As far as the numbers go, currently the House, there are 235 Republicans. There are 193 Democrats, and there are 7 vacancies. Everyone is up for re-election. I expect, just based on historical norms and some of the frustration with the Trump administration, that the Democrats may very well take control of the U.S. House. I don't think that's going to solve anything, But certainly, I think that's a possibility. I think it's much less likely in the Senate. The current composition in the Senate is 51 Republicans and 47 Democrats and 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats, so we'll call them Democrats. So it's 51-49 at this point. And of those seats, there are only, I think, 9 compared to, there are 9 Republican seats up for re-election in the Senate, 26 Democratic seats. So the Democrats would have to hold every one of their seats that's up for re-election, and that's unlikely, and flip a few of the Republican seats. That's possible, but it's hard to see just given the numbers that are up for re-election. Remember, the Senate is only elected every 6 years. Each election cycle has about a third of those up for re-election. So the next 2 election cycles, just based on the numbers, will have more Republican seats at risk and up for re-election. So I think the Senate is likely to stay about the same. And in terms of broad impact and influence it may have on other things, if you look at the U.S. Supreme Court, the 2 oldest justices are Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer. They're 85 and 80 years old. If one of them were to expire in the next 2 years or retire for health reasons or whatever, Trump will have another shot at putting a...
And what a circus this first shot was.
Well, I think...
But I don't want to get into that.
Well,
We're running out of time.
Okay, real quickly, I think you're going to have that repeat itself if that circumstance occurs. And also, if the Democrats take the House, I think you will see articles of impeachment written and forwarded to the Senate, but the Senate sits as judge and jury in an impeachment process. So you're going to have the same process play out that you had with the Kavanaugh hearing for the Supreme Court, only it's going to be whether or not the articles of impeachment will be approved or voted down. I think we have that to look forward to, and that will not be a pretty sight.
Well, with all that being said, again, our goal today was to simply just try to educate a little bit more about some of the platforms of some of these major races. Morgan, I really appreciate your discussions about millennials and how the voting process. If there's one final plea to getting your age group to go out and vote, what would it be?
You just have to do it no matter what. If you don't like the candidates, there's something about them that you will agree with. So just go out and vote. It doesn't take that much time. Even if you're in college, do an absentee ballot because your voice still should be heard.
Awesome. And John, thank you very much for coming down here and talking, giving some insight from somebody who's worked in government before and understands a lot more than the average person about what's going on in the ins and outs of these different races.
Well, thank you very much. My pleasure.
It's always a pleasure, and we'll have you back again. All right, so for our very special episode today, featuring SGA President Morgan Littleford and former Senior Deputy Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, John Butchar. This is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll be right back with Student Activities Director Adrienne Thoman to talk about some November events. We'll see you soon.
This is Dr. Linda Federizi-Williams, and you are listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by everybody's favorite guest, Adrienne Thoman. Adrienne, welcome back to the podcast to talk about November events.
Can't believe it's November already. Thanks for having me.
The one thing about the calendar is it never stops. Every day we go to bed, it advances another day. And
but yet it still feels like it sneaks up on you.
The days turn into weeks to months to years. Of course, that's the what everybody always says about time. It never stops, unfortunately. But that being said, this is always one of our favorite times of the year when the weather cools off a little bit, maybe a little bit more indoor activities. Maybe some of the outdoor activities are a little more fun too, because there's always very interesting things going on here on our campus, thanks to you. Also being joined by Nightly News Vice President Ian Kemmerer. Ian, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
You're very welcome, and it's nice to have you back from, you had a medical procedure over the summertime, but we're glad you're back walking and you're back around on campus, and we're glad you're back, my friend.
Yep, it's good to be back here on Central Penn's campus.
Well, obviously, coming up, Adrienne's Featured 3, everybody's favorite segment, but we will get to that momentarily. There was just a few things, though, Adrienne, that I wanted to talk about with you before we get into Adrienne's Featured 3.
Absolutely.
The number one thing that I wanted to talk about with you is something that we have been talking about on the podcast for quite some time. John DeLeo, actually now you've now got some competition for everybody's favorite guest because John's been on twice now talking the JFK assassination. Kind of jumped the gun last time and invited him down here before he had anything ironed out with doing a common hour, but we did get this on the calendar this term. So on Wednesday, November the 7th, the JFK assassination 55th anniversary will happen with John DeLeo. And in this presentation, he's going to talk a lot about some facts that sort of don't get publicized. And he talked about that with some of our on the podcast. But I would love to know why you thought that this was going to be an interesting event and something that the campus community would flock to.
Well, it's certainly timely, being the anniversary sounds like a positive word, but the annual day recognizing the assassination. So it's certainly timely, being able to bring him in. He knows so much about it that he can share with our students. So it just seemed like a really cool opportunity to highlight our awesome faculty and all that they know and understand and can share with us.
I'm so glad that you give faculty this opportunity, though, because while we're in the class and we know what we're talking about there, sometimes we don't get that chance to speak to people from the college campus community, right? Most of the time we get to talk to people in our own disciplines. Sometimes, I have the opportunity to teach humanities classes sometimes and some English classes that I do get across multiple disciplines. But it's rare that we get a chance to talk about something that we are extremely passionate about. And if you listen to John on the podcast, you would know that this guy is extremely interested in the case, has actually been to Dallas where this happened. And to be honest, he's got some very interesting and unique takes on the JFK assassination that, you'd think after 55 years, all these stones would be, overturned and a lot of this information would be out. But actually what John said on the last podcast, Adrienne, was a lot of the facts we have now, because it's been so long, are misinformation. And I think it's interesting that he's going to have this opportunity to do that. So everybody, November 7th, that's a Wednesday Common Hour, 12:10, that'll be an ATEC 200, and we'll be talking the 55th anniversary of the JFK assassination with Professor John DeLeo. Adrienne, another thing I wanted to talk about, and this is where I'm going to bring you in because of your work with the Central Penn players, a big monumental occasion will be coming on November 15th through the 17th, in which this will be the 4th student-created play called In the Middle. Showings will be Thursday and Friday at 7:30, the 15th and 16th, and Saturday a special matinee at 2:30 in the afternoon. Adrienne, what does it mean? And obviously, I know that you're not necessarily a Central Penn player yourself, but you've been in multiple of these productions, not necessarily the created plays, which I think you've been a part of as well. Can you tell us what it means to you to have this opportunity, this outlet, in maybe some of the other productions that you've done working with Janet Pixler in the theater?
One thing I love that Professor Bixler does is she truly brings unique performance pieces to the campus. The shows that she's showing in that theater and that she brings to the stage, they're focused on social justice. They're focused on meaning, and the whole concept of doing an original performance piece, it blows my mind. They start with nothing, no script, no cast, nothing. Like, they start from the very, very beginning, and she recruits these students, gets them involved, and they build, using their own stories, build a show. What an incredible experience. And I think that's something that's so unique that Janet brings to our Capital Blue Cross Theater here.
Now, which productions were you a part of?
Well, I haven't been part of an original performance piece. I was in Reclaiming My Time, which was written by Professor Chow and then directed by Professor Bixler.
There's rumors that might be going on the road.
Oh, I'm excited about that.
So we don't want to give too much away.
Very excited about
when
that.
When we get more official word, we will have Janet, you, and Professor Chow down to talk a little bit more about that. But in the meantime, so there's some hope for the show continuing. What other shows were you in?
I was in Passions,
which I remember, that was such a wonderful. I've seen every
Cleopatra.
Single one. Well, you fit the bill, right? But I know just from having you on before, you've done theater in the past. I mean, what does it mean to you that you're still able to do that in such a beautiful space that we have, not 20 feet from your office.
Well, I feel really lucky because there's one thing about, being in a show, it can often be very time consuming. You're doing rehearsals every night. And, don't get me wrong, I love my job. I love everything that I do in it, but the schedule's a little nutty. So doing a show outside of campus just isn't always a viable option. So doing it here on campus where I can sneak into the theater, rehearse, and then go back to my office is just... to me, it's really an incredible opportunity that I'm able to do that. I'm very thankful for it.
Well, that's wonderful, and I appreciate the fact that you've been a part of the theater, and we hope to see you back on stage soon. Ian, what is your piece in this as being part of the Central Penn Players? What role do you play in this fourth student-created play in the middle?
Us as a group and club, we're just trying to, make up a script of each individual's true story. Basically, certain people that are gonna want to do it are gonna, let their story be told from their from what happened with them. I'm gonna try my best to help out. I'm probably not gonna perform. Most likely, I'll probably do either stage crew or in the booth.
Well, and that was something you said. Obviously, Malcolm Fox, who's been our longtime person in the booth for the theater, he's getting ready to graduate. So looks like you might be the next person up here in the booth. But what does it mean when it's saying in the middle, without giving much away? And we are going to have Janet on a future podcast. Without giving much away, what does that even mean in the middle?
You better be careful.
Yeah.
They've been top secret about this.
In a general sense, I don't want Janet to get upset. I just want to try to get the plug out there, get the thoughts thinking. What does it mean in the middle?
Basically, what it try to keep
tricky.
This, basically, what she means is what kind of situations have you been most likely in the middle of a situation, and how were you able to overcome that situation? If it was a good outcome or a bad outcome. Basically, that's what she's trying to get involved with the students.
That's not going to get you in trouble.
Yeah,
That's a good overview. And again, we will have in a couple weeks we'll have Janet back to talk about this creative play. So just mark the dates down. It'll debut on Thursday, November 15th, with a 7:30 show on the 15th and the 16th, and a special matinee show on the 17th. So, Ian, best of luck to you, the Central Penn Players, and here's to another successful student-created play. All right, Adrienne, it is now time for everybody's favorite segment, Adrienne's Featured 3. All right, Adrienne, what do you have for the month of November? What events will everyone want to mark on their calendar?
Okay, I am honored to share the ones that I'm going to have in my Featured 3 this time around. So the first is being led by our Colleges Against Cancer Club. It's an annual event. It benefits the Feel Your Boobies Foundation, and it's called Bras Across Campus on Tuesday, November 6th. Now, for those of you that have participated in the past, this is when we get hundreds of bras and string them all across the big yellow bridge in campus, Hensey's Bridge. And it's just this visual reminder to know you're normal, do your monthly self-checks, and do what you got to do to stay healthy. So
this is something that the Feel Your Boobies campaign is doing all across the country. How did Central Penn College become part of this originally?
I love Lee Hurst is she's the founder of Feel Your Boobies, the executive director, and I had the opportunity to connect with her when she first created this. She's like, we think we want to do something on the college campus. And I remember we were sitting at Duke's kind of talking it out and brainstorming ideas. And, I'm so honored that Central Penn got to be one of that first groups of school, one of the
That's
first groups
amazing.
of schools to try it, to participate. And now it's something that they are truly trying to make a larger initiative. And we were there the first year. So
that's amazing, and that really goes to show what impact you do have on this campus. Not that we don't already know that, but there's just another instance of a major initiative we're doing here that really you were one of the people to get off the ground, which I think is fantastic. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the event that's going to take place. This is Tuesday, November the 6th, and it's noted the Quad Bridge area at 4:30. So are you looking to have everybody gather there for photos, or what does the event itself, what's going to go into that?
So Colleges Against Cancer will lead the ceremony, but typically it will involve some kind of guest speaker. We have refreshments and snacks, and then kind of the highlight of the event, the moment that we like to celebrate, is when we actually everybody kind of grabs part of that big broad chain and helps to string it onto the bridge. And then that gets to stay on campus, and they leave it up for a couple weeks kind of as a visual reminder. So
Fantastic.
we want everybody to be a part of that.
I cannot wait for that. That will be, again, Tuesday, November 6th at 4:30. All right, Adrienne, what is the number 2 event on Adrienne's Feature 3 for November?
Fall is one of those seasons. Our fall term, we have so much happening, and one of the big things that happen in the fall term is our Student Government Association elections. Nominations are open now. We are accepting nominations for candidates, and then we actually have 3 days of voting that happen November 7th, 8th, and 9th. And then on the 13th, is a Tuesday night at 6:30, we're going to do a big announcement of the new 2019 Student Government Association officers.
Well, and this has sort of been the case for the last couple years. While it's wonderful to get a new, SGA president, SGA vice president, and some of the other board positions they have, it's also kind of sad because even for last year, the election meant Yulee would be concluding her time, and the same with Morgan this year.
Mm-hmm.
Morgan has been a wonderful, wonderful addition to this campus, and so while it's wonderful to maybe see a new SGA president, it's also bittersweet in a way because we're really, really going to miss Morgan.
I agree. She keeps saying to me, she's like, "This is my last term," or "This is the last time I'll do this." And I'm like, "Stop, be quiet, no."
Well,
I don't want her to go yet.
Hopefully she's able to guide the new SGA president and give them some of her wisdom because, I even had her and Isaiah on talking about the food pantry, and I said, just thinking about your legacy here, it means something like that you'll remember forever. And Ian, hopefully you feel kind of the same way with the Nightly News. You've gotten to be the pioneer of so many things in not only our podcast studio, but in sports broadcasting. Looking back at your legacy, and that is what it's going to be. You're going to leave a legacy here. And I hope that that matters to you.
Yeah, it really does because you gave me such a good opportunity to be a part of something that we started, and it's a good feeling to have something that I started and can leave here for other people.
But you made a very good point here, and Adrienne probably feels the same way, and I don't want to speak for you, so please feel free to disagree if you like. But it really is. I mean, we provide the opportunity, and that's what a lot of students don't understand in the grand scheme of things is there's nothing but opportunity everywhere you look, and it's if you take advantage of that opportunity that's going to make the difference. Unfortunately, a lot of students don't necessarily take that opportunity and therefore may not have the same kind of legacy as somebody like you, Ian, or certainly Morgan or Yulee, or, even back to some of our other, SGA board members. So,
and it's so bittersweet because we see these amazing things that they're doing. We're so glad that they are becoming a part of our campus community, leaving that legacy. And, of course, our goal is for you to go off and do those amazing things outside of Central Penn to continue in your professional life and in your communities. But, man, we're going to be sad to see you go.
I'm always sad. Okay, Adrienne, what is the third event on Adrienne's Feature 3 for November?
So number 3 is going to be an initiative of our diversity committee. So they are doing, it's a Word Wednesday program. And we had done Word Wednesday I don't want to say back in the day, but a couple terms ago, we had done kind of a series where we picked naughty words and talked about where they came from and how they're used and what they mean to use them today. Well, we're going to add to a new installment of that. And we're talking about keyboard courage. So one of the things that is happening now in the day of social media is we find that people are maybe a little bit braver when they're sitting behind their keyboard.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
So we want to talk. We had some situations happen here on campus where things were written online that may not have been said in person. And we're going to talk about that a little bit.
I think that this Word Wednesday is an excellent idea. I hope that we continue this, even if it's a monthly or bi-monthly type of thing, because I think that our students have a lot to say about these types of things. And fortunately, being on a college campus, they have the outlet to say those things. And this is more of a maybe structured way to get some important things off of their chests and out into the public discourse. And maybe that's not an opportunity they might have in a classroom. Maybe the classroom setting isn't necessarily the place to do that, but this is going to give those people a place. Can you just describe for what Word Wednesday is as far as the setup goes of it? And again, I know they're all kind of unique, but what can someone expect if they come to this?
So they're very informal. It's not going to be sitting down and listening to a lecture for an hour. It is facilitated discussion. So you'll have a facilitator there that might ask guiding questions or questions to get the conversation started. But ultimately, our goal is for the facilitator to talk less and the participants to talk more and really have a chance to share their thoughts and their views about the topic.
Well, Ian, I certainly hope that you have an opportunity to go down to the Word Wednesday. It's a really cool thing. Have you ever been to one before?
No, I have not.
It's a really cool thing that, certainly Adrienne has been a part of coordinating. But again, there is a facilitator, and it is a chance for a little bit more open dialogue, a little bit more casual than it might typically be in the classroom setting. And there's a lot of excellent conversations that happen. So
I agree.
All right, for a quick recap, this is going to be Adrienne's Featured 3 plus some of the other events that we talked about here. Event number 1 on Adrienne's Featured 3 is going to be the Bras Across Campus. This will be Tuesday, November 6th at 4:30. You can meet at the Quad and Bridge area, and there will be pictures, and there will be all kinds of other events, speakers, those types of things. The second thing we discussed today was the JFK Assassination Common Hour featuring Professor John DeLeo. That'll be Wednesday, November 7th at 12:10 in ATEC 200. The second thing on Adrienne's Featured 3 will be the SGA Election Results Party. That'll be on November the 13th at 6:30. Keep an eye out on Student Central for more information about this results party. The number 3 on Adrienne's Featured 3 is Word Wednesday called Keyboard Courage. This will take place in ATEC 200 at 4 o'clock. And finally, the last thing we talked about, and best of luck to you, Ian, on this, the 4th annual student-created play In the Middle. That's going to be the 15th and 16th of November at 7:30, and a special matinee at 2:30 on Saturday. Adrienne, as always, such a pleasure to have you down to talk about November events, and we'll have you back down for December.
Thank you. Always great to be here.
You're very welcome, and enjoy your Thanksgiving.
Same to you.
I'm going to try. I actually have some time off, but I always have to cook for a ton of people, so it's always a very stressful time for me.
Ooh.
So fortunately, I have an extra day off. And Ian, thank you very much for spending your time here with us today. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we like to have you down as many times as you like to come down. So,
Yep.
All right, well, thank you guys very much for listening. For Vice President of the Nightly News, Ian Kemmerer, and for Student Activities Director, Adrienne Thoman, this is Professor Paul Miller, and we'll catch you next time on the Nightly News Podcast.